For almost 30 years, the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier has stood as one of Ireland's most famous unsolved cases. A French film producer, a remote holiday home in West Cork, a winter morning, a body found on a laneway outside the house that should have been peaceful. For decades, the case circles around the same name, Ian Bailey. He was arrested twice in Ireland. He was never charged in Ireland. He was later convicted in France in his absence, and he denied involvement until his death. But now the story has moved again. Not because of a new confession, not because of a dramatic witness walking into a police station, but because of something small, a DNA profile found near an eyelid on the tongue of Sophie Toscan du Plantier's right foot. According to reporting from the Irish Times, guards sought international help to identify that DNA. Forensic bodies in other countries were asked to compare the profile, but no match had been found at the time of that report. And that is what makes this new chapter so important, because if that DNA belongs to someone who had innocent contact with the evidence, it may only close one small question. But if it belonged to someone who had no reason to be near Sophie, near her clothes, or near that boot, then the case could move in a direction it has never moved before. For the first time in years, the central question is no longer only who did people suspect. Now the question is colder, sharper, and more scientific. Whose DNA was on Sophie's boot? And why was it there? Sophie Toscan du Plantier was 39 years old when she traveled to West Cork in December 1996. She was French, she worked in film and television, she was a mother, and she owned a holiday home near Tormore outside Skull in a quiet part of rural West Cork. The house was isolated, surrounded by rough countryside, narrow roads, stone walls, and scattered neighbors. It was the kind of place people come to for silence, distance, and privacy. Sophie had visited Ireland before. Her West Cork home was not random. It was a place she knew, a place she chose, and a place that seemed far from the pressure of her life in France. But that isolation also mattered, because when something happened there were fewer witnesses, fewer lights, fewer people passing by, and fewer immediate answers. Sophie was staying at the house shortly before Christmas. She was expected to return to France soon. Instead, on the morning of December 23, 1996, her neighbor Shirley Foster found Sophie dead on the laneway leading to the property. That discovery turned the quiet road in West Cork into the center of an international murder investigation, and almost immediately, the scene raised questions that would stay with the case for decades. The confirmed discovery happened on the morning of December 23, 1996. Sophie was found outside near the laneway leading to her holiday home. She was not found inside the house. She had made it out onto the road or laneway area before she lost her life. That detail mattered. It suggested movement. It suggested a confrontation that did not remain inside one place. And it suggested that the final moments of the attack may have happened outside in the cold near the entrance to the property. Investigators examined the area around the scene. Reports over the year have described items at or near the scene, including a rock and a concrete block, as key exhibits in the investigation. The crime was serious, violent, and deeply unusual for rural West Cork. But from the beginning, the case was difficult. The location was remote. The weather and outdoor conditions mattered. The scene had to be preserved. Evidence had to be gathered carefully. And in a case where there was no immediate arrest, every decision made it in those first hours become important, because once a crime scene is outdoor, time is not neutral. Weather, movement, handling, and delay can all affect what survives. And in Sophie's case, what survived would become one of the most important questions nearly 3 decades later. The first facts were clear. Sophie was dead. She has been found outside her holiday home. The attack happened in a remote area, and whoever was responsible had left before the discovery. The investigation focused on who knew Sophie was in West Cork, who may have seen her before her death, and who could have been near the property during the night or early morning. The physical evidence also mattered. Clothing, footwear, possible weapons, and material from the scene become part of the case file. But the early investigation did not produce a charge in Ireland. Over time, the public learned about statements, citing, alleged admission, contradictions, and disputes. Some witnesses become important, some accounts change, some evidence was challenged, and the case became not just a murder investigation, but a fight over what could be proven. This is one reason the new DNA angle matters so much. Witness accounts can shift, memories can weaken, statements can be questioned, but DNA, if collected properly and interpreted correctly, can sometimes answer a question that people cannot. Still, DNA does not speak by itself. It has to be identified, it has to be placed in context, and it has to be separate from contamination, innocent contact, and later handling. That is why the boot has become so important. Because if the profile found on Sophie's right boot is real, usable, and not explained by innocent contact, it could become the clearest physical clue the case had in years. The murder investigation remained active for years. Guards looked at the case. French authorities also pursued it. The media followed it closely. Documentaries, books, podcasts, and reports kept the case in public view. But public attention did not equal a solved case. In Ireland, Ian Bailey became the central suspect. He was an English former journalist living in West Cork. He was arrested twice by guards in connection with the investigation, but he was never charged in Ireland. The Irish Director of Public Prosecution did not bring a murder case against him. That decision became one of the defining facts of the case, because suspicion is not the same as admissible proof, a theory is not the same as prosecution, and the public narrative is not the same as evidence that can survive in court. In France, the legal path was different. In 2019, a French court convicted Bailey in his absence and sentenced him to 25 years. Bailey did not attend that trial. He denied involvement and continued to maintain his innocence. Ireland later refused to extradite him. Then in January 2024, Ian Bailey died. For many people, that felt like the end of the case, but guards did not close it. In 2022, before Bailey's death, guards confirmed that the Serious Crime Review team would conduct a full review of the murder. That review kept the investigation alive, and that review is now connected to the most important new question in the case. Not what people believed, not what people said, but what the evidence can still show. Cold cases are difficult because time damages almost everything. Witnesses age, memories blur, people die, documents get challenged, old forensic methods become outdated, and evidence that was once tested with older technology may later become useful again. That is what appears to be happening in Sophie's case. The new DNA attention focused on material connected to Sophie's boot. The Irish Times reported that the DNA profile was found near an eyelet on the tongue of her right boot. That is a specific location. It is not just a vague claim that DNA was somewhere in the case. But the strange part is not only that DNA exists. The strange part is what investigators must now prove about it. Was it left during the attack? Was it left by someone who handed the boot after the crime? Was it left by someone involved in forensic examination? Was it transferred accidentally? or does it belong to a person who has never been properly identified in the case? That is why guards reportedly began taking DNA samples from retired guards and others who may have come into contact with Sophie's body, clothing, or footwear after the murder. This is called elimination work. It is not glamorous. It is slow, but it is essential. Because before investigators can say a DNA profile matter, they must rule out the people who had legitimate contact with the evidence. If the profile matches a scene examiner, an exhibit officer, or someone who handled the evidence during the investigation, the meaning change. But if it does not match them, the question becomes much more serious, and that is where the case becomes dangerous for anyone who thought time had buried the truth. For decades, the name most associated with the Sophie Toscan du Plantier case was Ian Bailey. He lived in West Cork. He worked as a journalist. He reported on the case. He became the prime suspect in the public mind. And he spent the rest of his life denying that he killed Sophie. The case against him was always complicated. Reports over the years discussed alleged admission, injuries, witness accounts, and questions about his movements, but Irish prosecutors did not charge him. That is the legal fact that must stay at the center of any fair telling of the case. Bailey was convicted in France in absentia in 2019, but he was never convicted in Ireland. He denied involvement until his death in 2024. After he died, one possible source of answers disappeared with him. There would be no Irish trial with Bailey in the courtroom, no cross-examination of him in a murder trial in Ireland, no final statement under oath, no chance for him to answer the newest forensic questions directly. But the case did not depend only on Bailey anymore. The new DNA work shifted the investigation away from personality and public arguments and back toward physical evidence. If the DNA profile matches Bailey, that would be major. If it matches someone else, that could change the direction of the case. If it matches a person who handled evidence innocently, that would weaken the breakthrough. If it matches no one, the mystery remains, but with a profile that may still become useful later. That is why these updates matter, because the case is no longer only about the man everyone argued about. It is now about whatever science can identify someone the original investigation could not. The confirmed evidence and the center of this new chapter is limited but important. A DNA profile was reported near an eyelet on the tongue of Sophie's right foot. Forensic Science Ireland sent details of that profile to forensic bodies in other countries. No match had been reported. Guards were also trying to obtain elimination DNA samples from people who may have handled Sophie's body, clothes, or footwear during or after the original investigation. Those are the facts. Now here is one possible theory, and it must be treated only as a theory. One possible theory is that the boot DNA could represent contact during the final confrontation. The theory exists because of where the DNA was found. A boot is not like a glass in a kitchen or a door handles inside the home. A person does not usually touch the tongue or eyelid area of someone else's boot by accident during normal conversation. If the DNA belonged to someone with no innocent reason to have contact with Sophie's footwear, it could suggest close physical contact around the time of the attack. But the theory has a serious problem. The case is old. The evidence was handled. The scene was examined. The exhibits were later reviewed by forensic teams, and DNA can transfer in ways that do not prove guilt by themselves. So the theory only becomes stronger if investigators can prove three things. First, that the DNA profile is reliable. Second, that it does not belong to someone who handled the evidence for innocent reasons. Third, that the person it belongs to had no legitimate explanation for contact with Sophie's boots. Without those three steps, the DNA is important but not conclusive. That is the careful way to read this development. It could be a breakthrough, it could be contamination, it could identify a handler, or it could point to someone who has never been publicly connected to the case. And until the match is known, the DNA is not an answer. It is a door. As for the latest confirmed reporting, Sophie Toscan du Plantier murder remains unsolved in Ireland. Ian Bailey is dead. He was convicted in France in his absence. He was never charged in Ireland. He denied involvement and the Irish investigation remains active. The cold case review is not focused on modern forensic. Possibilities including DNA work that was not available in the same way during the original investigation. The Southern Star reported that Sophie's uncle described the new DNA evidence as valuable in the search for justice. That word matter. Valuable does not mean solved. Valuable does not mean person has been charged. Valuable does not mean the DNA is definitely the killer. But it means Sophie's family sees the new evidence as important, and after nearly 30 years, even a small physical clue can carry weight, because this case has been shaped by uncertainty for too long. Uncertain sighting, uncertain statements, uncertain legal outcomes, and certain public belief. The DNA profile could finally introduce something different, a name, but only if the science can get there.